Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We are starting our fourth webinar, so we're just nearly halfway through. So this will be talking about the lead up to buying your animals and what you need to do for those first few months and what that's going to look like. For those of you who are new, I'm Lisa Rayner. I'm the Livestock Project Officer for the Stock Sense Project, and I'll be facilitating this webinar. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. So that's just at the top bar of the webinar presentation. There should be two little chat boxes overlapping each other. Click in there, ask any questions if they're relevant to the slide, or if you just have one general questions. I'll be asking Malcolm the ones that are relevant to the slide, and we can move on from there. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land at which we are gathered this evening. I wish to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water, and community. So I'm from Wurundjeri country down here in Melbourne, so I welcome everyone here, or Wominjeka in the Woiwurrung language. So just to get an idea of where we are on this journey today, so we're on that webinar 4. So we've gone through owning or buying a farm, assessing what you want and have, farm layout and essential facilities, so just getting your farm ready for what you want, buying animals, what you need to know. So we heard from James Gadd from Elders and Malcolm, who's a long-time breeder, to get an idea of what available is out there. And I think, Malcolm, you'll be talking a little bit of what we spoke about during webinar 3. And then, so today we'll be talking about the first few months, so a critical period in terms of induction and setting up your farm and getting everything ready. Survey time. Like always, I'm going to push the survey because with the project, we like to know, I guess, what you guys are getting out of it, the questions you might want to ask. I saw that when we were looking at registrations for this webinar, it jumped a bit. So there might be a few new people in the room. For those who have already done it, no worries, grab a drink, relax. But for those, just scan the QR code. It should have about 6-7 questions outlining, I guess, where you are, what you're looking for, and if you have any questions that might relate to anywhere within our webinar series. So yeah, it'd be greatly appreciated if you could click that link. So this is one that we get an idea of where you are before, and we'll also do a survey just at the end to see if we're hitting the right thing and that people enjoy the webinar. There we are. So I'll hand it on to you, Malcolm, to talk about induction and managing stock for our webinar 4.
Thanks, Lisa.
Right.
Hello, everyone. Yep, it's number 4, and from my point of view, it will be my last one of this series, and I would like to thank Lisa and the team and Stock Sense for being able to give me a vehicle to be able to share my knowledge and hopefully practical experience and perhaps a little bit of wisdom there that will help you on your journey to farming. Okay, and yeah, as I said, I've been there, done that, and let's go from there. Stock, yep, it's I really love stock, as I said in the last webinar, and all those sort of different stocks I've had experience with. So, and it's great that some people have got just about all those animals on their farms, and we'll look at today on how we can best manage them. Okay, now on this journey, it's what I call the 3 what journey, and with a bit of A on the end of it. And so we've looked at what's been wanted. That's and that's a very important part, deciding on what your aims are in farming, and that is included along that journey. You want to make sure you're reviewing your progress and how you're going, because your changes are always occurring, and you'll need to have a look back at your original aims in farming, and then once again, for review situations, you'll want to identify and assess what you've actually got to work with. And then you can look at what can be considering the changes that have occurred and the aims, that includes your aims. And of course, as with all plans, unless you review them and action them, they're a bit of a waste of time doing. So next one, thanks. Okay, now when you are making your decisions and you're putting those decisions into action, I strongly recommend, and that's why I keep this slide keeps coming up. I strongly recommend to people that they do keep these 4 principles in mind when they are planning and acting. And today we will be looking at the stock induction and the first few months. And just once again, we're reviewing on what we went over last time. They say it sometimes takes 6 times before people take notice of what's information's out there. Reviewing. So that's what we assessed, and thanks to James Gadd, who ran this. He's a livestock agent with elders, and he gave us some good insights on what agents can do for us and their role, as well as selecting stock and so forth. Okay, now this webinar, as I just said, we will be talking about preparing for induction, actually inducting the stock, and quarantine. Quarantine's a big threat at the moment. Oh, well, quarantine's not, but the risk of disease is. Purpose of purchase paperwork when you've bought animals, what paperwork you need to fill in. And a big one I really like doing is stock training. It's got huge benefits, and providing stock requirements. There's 2 basic ones there. Okay, and once again, comparing breeding and trading management. That's a big area that can make a big difference, particularly to lifestyle farmers. Okay, and stock health and records. We'll be touching on that, but it's mainly for the next webinar. Okay, now livestock induction, getting your property ready. Now, hopefully, after all these webinars, you've got big plans to make sure you have got your property ready for having stock on it. Now, it's an unreal expectation that you will have everything right. You've got to have your pastures right. No use getting stock on if you haven't got any pastures for them to eat. Yeah, and no, if you haven't got your fences in stock-proof area, particularly your boundaries, etc., you shouldn't have stock on it because they won't stay there. And so that's just on the infrastructure and the feed, and of course water. So there's lots to get ready, but you can't do anything. Laneways very handy. I can give you an instance. It took 20 years before we got a central laneway in our property at Buchan, and the difference that made was fantastic. It just meant that at shearing time, our kids, I know there was rain on the way, we had to get a mob of sheep in while we're still shearing, getting the mob in, and the kids went around in the Suzuki and rounded them up and brought them down, and we got them into the shed before it started to rain, which fantastic help. Otherwise, they would have had to take, they wouldn't have been able to do it by themselves. They would have had to take the mob of sheep through 3 or 4 paddocks with stock in them and stuff like that. So I can't stress how important the central laneway system, but your infrastructure, if you want ease and efficient management of your stock, is how important it is. Okay, next one, thanks. Now, risk management. I do a lot on risk management when I'm doing reports and business plans for people, but for clients. you don't have to be scared of risk management. A lot of people seem to be, particularly on farms, because it is a risky business, which is a risky lifestyle even. But if you can identify your risks, you're more likely to be able to plan them. And if you've got a plan in place to mitigate the possibilities of them happening and all the consequences if they do. So risk management's very thing. But now, as regards buying stock, there's an old saying, buyer beware. That means it's your responsibility to make sure that you cover all, cross your T's and dot your I's as regards those stocks. So and make sure you know what you're wanting to buy and you know what's good and what's not good. So do that research and research livestock agents, because they can definitely help you from that point of view. If you get a good stock agent, they're like gold, but you need to research and make sure they're good ones. Okay, and then another hint on if you're going to buy stock and you're going to buy them in sale yards, well, go to some sale yards and just for practice. Or if you're going on to Auctions Plus, which is a virtual auction system, and it's as James described it, and try just see what goes on in there. And I like the Auctions Plus because there's a lot of information about the stock that you're buying, and it's done by qualified assessors of those stock. So it's a really good way. But the lots are usually quite big. They might be too big for some people. Now look into private sales once again. See who's advertising, or if your agent, get them to see what there is private sales with the agent or what are being advertised for private sales. Now, if you're going on to big properties, just beware from that point of view of private sales. There's a fair few advertised on Gumtree and that sort of stuff like that, and they are usually, they're not always, but you just got to be more particularly careful in that area. Once again, research the current prices that are going around for stock, and as regards the numbers that are coming in and what's available at sales. And of course, biosecurity. Sort of really investigate this one. We did buy some stock, some merino ewes from up Swan Hill once, and I rechecked out whether or not there was any indication of Leone's disease on the property, let alone the district. And there had been known ones in the district, but this property assured me they were pretty good. And we bought sheep, I think it was 400 or 500 merinos down. And we were doing the testing program, and all my other sheep, my stud Parendales and everything else, were all clear, and all my sheep were clear with all my tests. But when we sent these sheep off, because they've got a fair bit of age about them, we sent them off to the processors. They picked them up at the processors, and from that there was 2 that had it. We had no signs or tests in any of our other sheep, but our whole property was quarantined. So it is a big thing. We'll talk a bit more about that later on, so beware on that. Okay, buying. I say okay a lot, I'm afraid. Sorry about that. Buying your livestock. Okay, connect with your agent. This is when you're going to a sale, whether it's private or at the sale. Stick to your budget. Have a budget beforehand and stick to it, with a little bit of leeway, of course, but that's up to you. pick your animals that you want and pick a few others that pick your first choice, pick your second choice, third, fourth choice if you're in the sale yards and even in a private one. And someone might be, if you had a private one, they want to sell you all of them. But you can definitely, usually 9 times out of 10, you can go through them and take out any ones that you don't like within a few numbers, that sort of thing. So well worthwhile doing that. And of course, talk to the vendors, agents. They've got good language. They know how to talk to you, but also talk to the vendor and you can get straight from the horse's mouth a bit more. Okay. Right, next one, thanks. Okay, you've brought the stock. So at the sale yards, it's been to fall the hammer, and as soon as that hammer falls, they are your stock. Okay, it's important to remember. So suggestion nowadays, everyone's got phones. So I suggest you take a photograph of your stock, more than one, and just to help identification. It's a bit hard when they're all black, but it still helps just in case there's some disagreement at a future time. Count them if possible. It's hard at sheep sales. It's okay at private sales. You can count them along with when they do, but you've got to be good at counting. It helps. But yeah, important to count. People have been short of animals. I know that when they've been delivered. And organise to, and this is pretty important, particularly if you're new to it, organise for the delivery to be in daylight. You can organise for it, doesn't guarantee it's going to happen that way because you're dealing with stock and people and machinery and they can all break down. So yeah, but do your best to organise for daylight delivery. Very important. Now, this is where the agent comes really to the fore, as far as I'm concerned. They can organise the livestock carrier for you. I do, suggest you get a truck safe carrier. It's a certified one, and you can stipulate that to your agent, of course. They're really good for that. And send. Get the agent will send you a copy of the NVD. That's the papers that go with the sale, of course. What's that stand for, Lisa? NVD?
National Vendor Declaration.
Thank you. And now this is can be particularly for people that don't have a wand or a wand for reading the electronic tags. They should have those tags on there from the sale anyway, but if it's a private sale, they won't have. But the stock agent can transfer the stock to your PIC number, property identification code. Everyone should have one who are have stock on their place, livestock on their place. Okay, now here's a stock list, checklist, a suggested one. And if anyone's got something else there, please put it in the chat box at any time. There's something in there now. Tegan, sorry,
Yep.
Lisa, you'll be able to look at that.
Yep.
But as we're going through this checklist, yeah, put something else if I haven't got it in there. Okay, you've got to pay the piper for the cattle, so make sure your money's in the account to do so. It's usually 7 days, I think, or fortnight, some cases. If you're going through an agent, that is. Animal health treatments, definitely you want to have them on hand at your yards ready to treat animals. If you're able to get on antibiotics, that's great. If you're able to have them on hand, and you know how to use them, of course. But any other health treatments such as drenches, and that will depend on the history, health history and treatment history of those animals you've got. If they haven't been treated for parasites or vaccines, I suggest you do it. Have those treatments on hand to do in a day or two's time. Anyway, water, but particularly have any other treatments on hand just in case there's something accident, such as if there's something that's lost a bit of skin, a bit of fly strike powder actually it's a good remedy I've found to put onto the little wound. And of course, if there's a problem with a serious wound, of course, to get the vet really quickly. Anyway, water in the trough, make sure there's water in the trough in the holding paddock or the quarantine paddock that you're going to be putting them into. Feed in the holding quarantine paddock, like a round bale of good quality hay. Minerals, trace elements, that's another thing you can have on hand. You can drench them if they do it, or you can have a mineral block, a multi-purpose trace element mineral block in the holding paddock. Mineral blocks can be expensive, but we'll talk about that a little bit later, but they're well worthwhile. All gates. Now, this is an important one, and I've done this myself. I've left a gate not, open, which I thought I'd close, but so animals just come out of the truck and disappeared through into the laneway or another paddock where they shouldn't have been. Always unload to a secure yard, not into the paddock. Now, another important point, and I've seen plenty of loading ramps and unloading ramps, which are dangerous for both human and animal. And the truckie is human, I guess. Loading ramps, holes and too much of a space between the truck and the first post, the ramp, where animals will try to get out and they get stuck, or they do force their way through, but they can get injured that way. There can be holes in the ramp, and so those sorts of things. So just make sure they're well and truly safe, and it's accessible for the truck and the size truck that's going to be delivering them. And you don't want the truck to be slipping off the track and tipping over. I've seen all sorts of things of, having to pull the truck in with a tractor because it's too wet. So it's important that it's easily accessible. Then we've got farm address. Yeah, you don't want the truck to get lost. GPS, particularly in the country, is not good. You can send them down the wrong track. So make sure they've got easy instructions as well as Google to get to your property. And your front entrance, make it clear with the farm name on it and the address number. That's pretty important, that. Their contact details, have those in your phone, along with the agent, your truckie, vendor, the vet. Just make sure you got your phone charged as well. Now, well-placed lights. Now, if they happen to get there after dark, which can happen, well and truly, you want to make sure the lights are, and the truckie will help you on that, where they are best set up. But you don't want shadows. And particularly if you're dealing with sheep, particularly merino sheep. I remember spending an hour and a half actually individually getting off about 400 merino sheep off, because it was dark, it was moonlit, but they would not come off that truck, and we had to carry them off. But after the first deck, we gave up and just opened up the truck and went down to bed. The truckie, we went back to bed. We went to bed, and when we early in the morning, we got up and they were all out in the yard. So a good lesson to learn. Well-placed lights, yep, only if they need it. Paperwork, I do ask the truckie for some paperwork if he's got it, like the MVD and so forth. A couple of comfort and now this is always when I was delivering bulls to clients, I would insist on them having a couple of steers or cows or whatever it may be, not other bulls in the yard, particularly if it's a lone bull, to be company for the bull, because bulls, once again, they are herd animals. They like that socialisation, and after the stress of being transported, they do not like. They can be stirred up a bit. Not necessarily in their nature, it's just understandable. Okay. Next slide. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah. Okay. Now, just other considerations when you're receiving your animals. Safety of self and others on farm. That's mandatory for everything, but just because you are moving animals that have been stressed, because been through a sale yard, they've been transported. Well, they've been transported twice, to and from, if you've got them from the yards. That's another advantage of Auctions Plus. They only get transported once. It's a really good system, actually. Okay, so now a big one on this is discussing the process with others. Okay, working in the yards, particularly with family, is a recognised stress time, and conflicts occur. I can give you, I was doing a conflict workshop, and at the workshop, participants had to do a role play. They had to draw up a role play and act out that role play. So ask them what conflict on farms can we do the role play on? And there was dead silence. And then someone said, working with the family in the stockyards. And everyone just turned around and says, yes. For some reason, the family, it's harder to work with family than it is with strangers. But yeah, so, and the way of helping to lessen the chances of that conflict happening is, one way anyway, is to make sure you discuss the process, what's going to happen, not in the yards, but before you get to the yards. Discuss with all those that are going to be involved what the process is and get their agreement. That will help. Another thing was that if the family, like my wife, for example, my wife Carol, if I started to get stressed and started to, even my tone changed, she would walk home or go home. And so I had to learn to temper my temperament, if you like, if I wanted help in the yard. So that's another way of the family not standing for being abused in the yards. Okay, but it's a really good part of that 4P or 4 principles to work for too. Loading ramp, we've done that. Stock are likely to be stressed, remember that, we've done that. Extra care with bulls, we've done that. And check all gates. Yeah, just to make sure they are secured. Yep, very important.
Malcolm, sorry to interrupt.
Yep.
Yep, can you see me? We've just had a question come in from the chat, and someone's asked, wouldn't comfort animals compromise the quarantine protocol? So we're talking about isolating new stock when they're coming in. But I guess if you've already had the companion steers that you're talking about for the bulls, would that compromise the biosecurity and quarantine that you're doing?
No, because you'd keep those ones with the bull.
Okay. So what would that look like in terms of you would separate a few steers away from your group, put them in with the bull, and then hold it for the whole entire time that you're quarantining?
Definitely.
I think it's around 2 weeks.
Yeah, I work on about 2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That can vary a little bit, but we can work on that a little bit later. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, but definitely, you definitely quarantine them. One, because you don't want to leave the bull by himself.
Okay.
At any time.
Yep. So you just sort of have to treat the steers that you've brought in as if they're the same with the bull. Quarantine them all, treat them all the same.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay.
Okay. And next slide. Thanks. Okay, now they're coming off the truck. Well, they're not yet. You want to make sure you get a ETA on the arrival of the truck, and make sure you're there. And that doesn't always occur. If you're not going to be there, tee up for a neighbour or anyone else in the family or anything else to receive them, but make sure that preliminary work's been done beforehand. If you can't make it, make sure those requirements are done beforehand. Yeah, so yeah, I've had just the truck, and I know the truck driver very well. Whenever, and they've put them in the yards, and they've done what I've asked for them to do, and I've got no problem with that. If you know the truck driver and they're capable of doing it, that'd be good. Otherwise, make sure you're there. Count the stock off the truck if you can, and put them into a secure yard. That's part of the working yards. Don't let them out into a paddock, straight into a paddock, and don't let them into even the quarantine containment area. And you inspect them in the yards, you inspect them as they come off the truck. And once again, if there's any injury, take a photograph of that injury and treat that injury, of course. That's the main thing. And ask the truck driver for any paperwork. Yep.
So
that's trouble with that photograph up on the top end. Those sheep are just coming out straight into the paddock. And you're not inducting them at all into your property, and nor having a proper inspection of them, etc.
I just had a thing on the first one. If you mentioned you didn't need to be there, or if you know the truck driver, you might not have to be there. We had a WorkSafe talk about, I guess, responsibilities of if someone comes onto your property. If the truckie comes onto your property and you're not there and they get injured, I guess it's John Darcy, who is working for our Making Our Farms Safer project. He mentioned that it'd be the responsibility of the farmer if the truckie got injured during that process, because he'd walk onto that person's property.
It could be. That's why it's very important to have public liability insurance for one. But that's insurance. But the object is not for them to get injured.
Yep.
So definitely, if you're inducting your stock, it's the same if you're inducting any service provider. You need to really induct them onto the property, right? Yep. So once again, it's very good to have written in, safety protocols that you can give them. But it's, as I said, it's very important that you do your utmost to make sure all your infrastructure and all equipment is safe to be used.
Gotcha. Beautiful.
Yeah, but a very good point. It's kind of I put accidents and safety as number one risk for any farming operation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Malcolm.
No worries, pleasure. Okay, biosecurity. Yeah, we mentioned it before. Now, it's been a lot in the news in the last 2 years, but it's a constant threat out there. And foot and mouth we do not want for these various reasons. I've got listed there. Not only, as I said, I got quarantined. Our property got quarantined at one stage, and that cost us about $150,000. From the point of view of when we went to sell stock, we could only sell them for slaughter, and we were into breeding stud stocks as well. So that was a big hit. It's not necessarily the disease that gets you, but it can be your quarantine regulations. So, and that was the case with Yonis. Yonis is a contagious disease, but it's quite manageable. But it was the quarantining and the government trying to eradicate it, which they could never eradicate. It was a major problem. And it's going to be like that with foot and mouth. If it gets in, we won't be able to eradicate it. And now we've got too many wild pigs and deer and everything else that will spread it. So it will have a devastating effect, both as an industry and the country as a whole, particularly rural regions. You can imagine how much some towns rely on primary industry, on the livestock industry. So I can't stress how important biosecurity is. So you can do your job as an individual by protecting yourself, but also protecting the whole country. Okay, thanks.
I'll just make a little point, I guess, we talked to Vic a lot about it with their biosecurity division. That number on the top right-hand corner, that operates 24/7. It's free. If you think that, say, an animal dropped dead for no particular reason and you don't know why, you can just call that number just to get advice. So it's not something that you commit yourself to, or that's a big thing that's going to cost you. If they do suspect that it's a emergency animal disease or unknown disease, a district veterinary officer will usually come out and check out what's going on, and that cost gets partially covered by the government. So I guess that's a good incentive just to keep on top of things, and it's free. So
yeah, it's a very good point also, in the fact that some people may be tempted to hide the fact that they've got it.
Yeah.
Got a disease they don't know about, and they don't want to take any risk of losing all these effects of getting an effect. But believe me, if you've got it, other people have got it, and it's going to hit you anyway.
Yeah, it's either going to be, I guess, you or your neighbor. Someone's going to eventually report it, but I guess if you do it first, I guess that spread will get limited. And a lot of the time, the government is going to compensate for the loss of animals on your property.
Well, it's a moral responsibility as much as animal welfare and everything else. It's one of those things that it's a real moral thing that you need to do. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I imported a bull from Canada, live one, back when we were able to do so, and he ended up with a genetic defect, which there were no tests for. Now, that was pretty costly, but I declared it, and we were able to work it through. And the same with, because we had the biggest herd in the world of registered Galloways, another genetic defect of manissidosis came up, and we were able to identify those with the University of Sydney and identify the carriers. And we had a test herd, and they were able to develop a test DNA test from that herd. Now that's other breeds have got the same disease, slightly different version of it, but got the Angus have got it, Murray Greys, etc., etc. But they've got now DNA tests to be able to map it, and it's you can manage it and still breed with those genetics. Yep, it's a really good from that point of view, but it's well worthwhile identifying and declaring that there's an animal there. That,
yeah, always better safe than sorry.
big pardon?
Always better safe than sorry.
Oh, well, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Okay. Next one, thanks. Okay, animal health. This will be a lot more talked about in the next two webinars, particularly next one, isn't it, Lisa?
Yes. Yep. That's with Dr. Chelsea Hurd. So she's a livestock veterinarian. She'll be going over.
And yeah, great one too. Yep. Okay, now we've got them in the yards, you've bought them, they've been transported, you've received them. Now it's time to start the induction properly, the training part of it. So you put them into the prepared holding paddock, and I hope you know what I mean by prepared. It's a stock-proof fences, stock-proof water, of good quality and easily accessible water, and you just let them in that quarantine holding paddock for a couple of days to let them settle down. But you just quietly check them the next morning for any injury or ill health, and take a photograph of them in there as well. They sometimes, they might have been injured on the transportation or at the yards or something like that, and that may not have come out until the next day. So have a good look at them. Admire how well you look, what you bought, but don't expect them to look as if they'll look a lot better in a month's time. Believe me. Okay, give them any health treatments if they require them, trenches and so forth. Okay, I don't recommend doing that with the animal down there. You've done it, I've done it. You can put boluses that way, but if you just got doing them a down the throat trench, I'd suggest a hook. It's much better. You don't have to get that close to the animal. You don't have to hold on to them like that. You've got to be very careful if you're doing anything to the head, that the animal can come up and knock you out or, really do some damage there. So take that into real consideration. And there's other sorts of drenches, of course, on the back, along the back liners, and there's injections as well. But make sure you know how to apply the various health treatments. Okay, thanks, Lisa. Right, Kay, the stock, some of my clients' stock, he was in the training enterprise. He was new to farming. He bought those black baldies up in the top left-hand side. And they were trucked home, and he put them into a quarantine paddock, and he started his training. Now, hay, you can see there's two different, there's no, on the one on the right, bottom right, there's hay there, but it's not in a hay feeder. It's a good way of wasting hay. The cattle will like it because they can use it to lie on, as well as, and goats and sheep will climb all over it. So it's a good idea to have it in a good hay container. What do they call them? Feeder, hay feeder. So, okay, next one, thanks. As I said, let them settle because they would have been stressed out. You would have been, it gives you a chance to settle as well. I don't know about you, but when I'm buying stock and or selling stock, I still get tense in the stomach a bit, and it can be a bit of a stressful time. So it's a good chance to just simmer down, settle down. Okay, next steps. You've got them in, they've settled down for a day or two. So just quietly, don't run them into the yards, walk them in nice and quietly and put them in the yards. You can open up the gates in the various yards so they can walk around the yards. And then while they're in the yards, you can put fresh hay, if needed, into the holding paddock or the quarantine paddock. Okay? Because what you want to do is when you let them out, they go straight out to the paddock and straight onto the fresh hay. And the way of training animals is quite often through the stomach. Food, food, food. So make sure it's something they want to eat. Make sure there's a mineral block in there for them as well, because the mineral block's important, more so when they get onto pasture as well. But getting the minerals where they've got the choice, or you're giving them a shotgun mixture in a mineral block, they can, they come from a different district. They may be iodine deficient. I've had that on my own place, and you may be wanting to put them onto a brassica crop or a multi-species crop that's got a fair bit of brassica in it. That can make your iodine deficiency a lot worse, and iodine deficiency can cause stillborn births, abortion, and low milk production. So I don't recommend it. It's well worthwhile putting some trace elements and minerals out for them to have at ab lib. Okay, now on the process, sorry, I got off the track. So make sure they are going back out onto fresh hay or back out to their feed. Repeat this for a couple of days. Then on the third or fourth day, you can open up your race and forcing yard and put them through the race and open the crush at the front or side, whichever way you like to do it, but prefer the front, and let them just go through without doing any treatment, without catching them in the headlock, and just do that each time you bring them in. You leave them in the yard for about an hour or so, and then open up the race and crush and put them through the race, so that eventually the only way they get out there is by going through the crush and race, back out onto their feed. And you just repeat this. And after that, of course, this conditioning, particularly if you're doing it at weaning time, if you've got a breeding operation and you're doing this at weaning time, you've got them for life. Other animals, as they come on, if you're buying, say, trading animals that have already been weaned and so forth, you still want to do this training, but they might take a little bit more to do it. And because you've bought them, there's usually allow for 10 to 20% of the animals are not going to be what you want on the place. And that could be because of structure or something else like that if you've bought them out of the yards, particularly, or if you've bought them elsewhere. But and one of the big ones is that quite often they might put in one animal that's toey or two animals that are pretty, their temperament could be better. So, and this is when you're doing this training program, you'll get that at the end of that training program. The last time you put them out of the yard, through the race and out back into their holding paddock, you stand into the stand by the gate. Hopefully it's a 12-foot gate that goes into the holding paddock. And you hold the gate right open and stand by that. And by that time, those animals should be able to walk past you without, and if an animal's not reluctant to do so, even though all the mates have gone through, there's a good chance that animal's a nervous type animal and is not going to be one that you want to keep, or two that you don't want to keep. I had one there that he was a bull, and he was a fantastic bull. And he had very good weight gain, very good conformation structure and everything else. Everything was right about him, except for he would not pass me, go past me through the gate back with his mates. I ended up, he didn't, never sold him as a bull because of his temperament. Okay, now, after a couple of weeks of this, and this, of course, if you've got the time and the ability to be able to do it, you have to make adjustments according to your life and your program, of course. This is just ideal if you can do this. Okay. Now, remember that, you are working in the yards. Remember that if you want your family to help you and you want to enjoy it, get that stress out of it if you can, and that way you can all enjoy the process a lot better. Okay, and no use me telling you to relax. It's up to you to work that out, because no use telling anyone to relax because they never do on command. Okay. Now, we're getting on to the actual. We've put them out into your first paddock at the top of your grazing wedge. But I do suggest you go out into that paddock before you let them out of the holding paddock. You go out of that paddock and you go into the paddock that you're about to put them in, and make sure the water's right and the fences are right. And you've got a mineral block or minerals in there for them to have. Most important, because these animals, it's a strange land, and even though you've done an induction training program, they are going to be wary of the new environment. There might be, horses around, there might be other cattle, all sorts of things that make them pretty wary. So you want a good laneway to get to and a good gateway, and whereby there's no chance of them escaping or little chance of them escaping or getting into another paddock, and that everything's there waiting for them. And quite often you'll see them go into the paddock and they'll put their tails up and run across the paddock and wreck your pasture. But it's really good to see them, put their heads down and really enjoy that pasture. Okay, so make sure that infrastructure is right to do that with, and do it easily. Because once they get through, if they jump through a paddock, through a fence, or jump over a fence or whatever it is, it's hard to get them back. Okay, pasture management. Okay, now with going back on to two requirements, and that's going back to other things that animals want. They want good, clean water, and they want good feed. Now, if you've got good feed, you usually have a healthy animal. And it's amazing. It's as soon as you start to stress the animal feed-wise, that's when ill health. And it's the same as people. If you get stressed, you're far more open to disease and ill health. So give them what they want, and they want feed and water. There's other things they want, but they need feed and water. Okay. But now, as regards grazing management, you want the good old wedge situation for rotational grazing. And it will vary, but the basic principles are get them on there and get them off. Get them on, pressure them onto the plate, onto the things so they eat the lot, and then get them off as quick as you can. So you want to have a number of paddocks in your rotation to be able to do that. And you don't put them back onto that paddock you've grazed off until you've got the right height or leaf stage of leaf growth. You want to keep your pastures vegetative. There are some paddocks that you may want to keep for a longer rotation and let them go reproductive purposes, so that it puts more humus back into the soil. And you want that feed. You don't need that feed for young growing animals or lactating cattle or sheep or goats. That you just want that for maintenance of your breeding stock. And that's a good paddock to have that in your system, whereby you can do that. But the majority, when you've got your grazing going for production, not maintenance, you want to have that grazing, what we call grazing wedge, in place. Okay, so once they've chewed it off, get them off. The quicker you can do that, they say that optimum is 1 day. But we had a system whereby we couldn't work it with that. And we had 7 days, but it depends on the size of the paddock and how much feed's in the paddock and everything else. But with the feed budgeting we had, with the spreadsheet I knew how many days that particular mob had in that particular paddock, because it was about 4 kilometres I had to travel to move them. So it was very handy to be able to, but it took years to fine tune that. Okay.
So
Now, just that same basic principle goes with and pro-graze, organic, regenerative, or biodynamic. It's all the same principle. Look after your soil. Make sure that's right to start with. Get that soil right, and your multi-species cropping is very good for cropping that to get ready for permanent pastures. You don't want to be cropping multi-species cropping all the time, because you're disturbing the soil and you haven't got the right species for making it permanent. So I'm a big advocate of having permanent multi-species permanent pastures for your environment. Yep.
Someone, when they were filling out the survey, they had a question, I guess, that relates a little bit to this, and maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it in webinar 6, but they said they want to know about controlling introduced species, improving ecological value, and I guess not adding pollutants by not using conventional farming practices or chemicals.
Okay, can we move that one to the open forum and or the next webinars as well? But that would be a good topic, because I need to ask what they consider is conventional farming.
Yep.
I don't know what conventional farming is.
Yep.
And it used to be set stocking.
Yeah.
Now conventional farming is rotational grazing, as far as I'm concerned. And we've been doing that ourselves for 30 years under a pro-graze program, and even longer than that before under biodynamics. So so
I'll keep that in mind.
That's a good one, because there's a lot of that needs to be discussed with a lot of clarification on that one.
Sure.
Yep.
Beautiful.
Okay, there's your multi-species crop. On your left, grazing crop. Now, it's a grazing crop. It's not for harvesting for seed or grain or whatever. It's purely for grazing. It's really good for opening up the soil, allowing aeration of the soil, because you've got deep rooting plants. You've got a big variety, and different plants will bring up different elements from the depths of the soil and make them more readily available. It'll allow for aeration of your soil, which microbes need. It's very important from that point of view. It'll help on the drainage, but also for the humus, because if you graze a crop or pasture, a certain percentage of the roots slough off, and that becomes, carbon in your soil, humus in your soil. And that's a great, the soil's a great sponge for water, for holding your water. And of course, water's great for growing plants. Okay, so that's why they use it as helping to condition the soil for introducing a multi-species permanent pasture. But you might do that for a couple of years at the most, depending on your soil and so forth, because it can take a fair bit out of your soil, but it also can help make those minerals more available, trace elements more available to your permanent pastures as well. Okay. Okay, now we're getting on to the cattle, the sheep and the goats. Right, this is a breeding enterprise, and that's people love breeding, but it's a lot more complicated, needs a lot more skill, a lot more time input. What else? More money than does trading. Or and it's also a higher risk operation with our climates. Like I now with clients, and I learnt this the hard way, because used to be all breeding beef and with beef and sheep and goats. And when the droughts hit, it cost us an absolute fortune in buying in hay, feed to feed them. So what I do recommend now, if you're going to go breeding, and that will vary depending on your environment and climate, but I wouldn't go any more than 50% of your stocking rate being breeding stock. In fact, and that's only if you're in reasonably good, reliable rainfall area. You can go higher than that if you're in, say, South Gippsland, which Peter knows, with 1,000 mils plus, that sort of stuff, and it's very reliable. You can go into more breeding. But if you're in East Gippsland, like Buchan, like we were as well, it can be the death of you, as well as your stock. So I don't recommend that. You would have a 30% breeding stock. Either that or be prepared to conserve feed like the Northern Hemisphere does. They might have to conserve their feed for, well, Siberia, I know they had to do it for about 9 months. But, most other places are up to 6 months. They have to conserve their feed every year for that. And we can treat that with our normal dry seasons. In East Gippsland, you could easily have 6 months without pasture growth. So you store it in your paddocks, and you can store it. We used to have silage pits. Okay. Okay, the next one. Now, this is a calendar, and those ones there, the actual, the one before, thanks, Lisa. There's a lot of treatments and everything else that you do with the stock, but breeding stock. And if we can send a PDF of that A4 size, that would be good, wouldn't it, Lisa?
Will do.
Yep. Okay. And that applies to all these ones. Next one. And it goes for the calendar as well. Here's a calendar of a example calendar, because you can adjust it according to your operation, your environment, your money, all sorts of things that you can adjust it to, but it gives you a bit of an idea of what's involved with breeding stock, and so forth from that point of view. And we'll send a template with these examples on it, but also a spreadsheet that you can fill in, okay, and develop your own calendar for the year.
I had another question that came through on the survey. They wanted to know how to manage weeds, and I can see that in the calendar you've got pasture weed spraying and woody weed spraying. Can you and you've done it in both May, September, and December. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. If we're particularly if you're sowing pastures in May, or April, depending on, I always recommend autumn sowing for permanent pastures. And we used to do all direct. After doing trials for 3 years, we do direct sowing, and it's a lot of money. If you're going to do put pastures in, and this is a very important point, no use spending money, time, and effort into putting in good species of pasture if you don't have your good rotational grazing practice in. So you want the infrastructure in, your fencing and everything else, so that you can do that before you sow your pastures down, your permanent pastures. So it's very important, because those pastures, unless you've got good rotational grazing and management, you won't, those pastures won't last long. The weeds will start coming in again. But if you sow, even if you disturb the soil a little bit, if you go a direct drill, particularly a disc one, it doesn't disturb it much at all, which is the best way to go. You can get weeds coming up in the early stages. Now, a low strength spray at the right time can help your pastures establish well. And we used to use Roundup for direct spraying out beforehand. Now, I went to a regenerative agriculture event, and a biochemist who runs 2,000 acres of sheep production with her mother. She was an extremely very good talker, and seems to have only been doing it for 4 years, but she's in the way of developing her pastures. She does pasture cropping. She sprays out beforehand, direct drills pasture cropping in, and then moves further later on into permanent pasture, multi-species, of course, direct drilling again. But she's had to use glyphosate to do so. Now, she happens to be a PhD in biochemistry. So she gets soil testing done, she gets tissue testing done and everything else. She does it herself in some cases. She has found no traces of glyphosate in her soil. But there's a trade-off for those people that don't want to use chemicals. You've got, and then have to have management plans in place to combat weeds, because weeds would take over. We were biodynamic when we first went down to Buchan, but Buchan being the way it was, beautiful deep red soils, everything else, and in certain parts of it, if we could not manage that place if we didn't use chemicals to handle the weeds. And we could have variegated thistles that were 7-8 foot high. And it would just leave the ground completely bare after they died off. So we would have no pasture at all if we didn't do that. And we had one of our properties, we had 2,000 acres of blackberries. Now, in rocky country, There's no other way you can reduce them dramatically with goats, and we had 600 goats to do that with on the blackberries, but we had to use sprays to kill them out. And even then they keep coming back, and to a certain extent they did. But if you don't keep on them with the spray, and there's no other method and I've heard of plenty of other methods and proved them wrong of doing them, and chemicals about the only way of doing blackberries, for example.
Yep, and I guess we'll touch on this a little bit more in webinar 6 as well.
Yep, okay. But yeah, weeds can be a major problem. Right. What have we got now? Calendar. This is now the first one we saw was autumn calving. Always a big debate about whether you have spring calving or autumn calving. Some people have both. We used to have both, which is crazy. You go one or the other, and it's in most cases proven to be spring or early spring calving, late winter, early spring calving, for example. This is with cattle, of course. It'd be the best time for doing it for various reasons. And next couple of webinars, I'll touch on that, but it's very important facet as regards for grazing management, particularly to have it in only have one group of animals that you're basically main group of breeding stock that you've got going around, like a dairy farm, if you like, from that point of view. It's also very handy from a marketing point of view as well. Okay. Now we're getting onto this KISS factor. One of the 4 principles, remember the 4 principles. This is a KISS principle. Keep it safe and simple. And as you can see, there's a lot less work involved with trading operations. And you're still working with animals, so welfare is very important. But one thing you do about when you're buying your trading animals, you do it with how much pasture. You want to at least 4 months pasture ahead of you in the paddocks before you buy stock. 4 months will get you into the, at least into the next bracket that you're aiming for, possibly, depending on whether you're trying to send them to processors direct or whether you're selling them for backgrounding to feedlots. But yeah, it's that feed availability. It's most important. If you're running low in that feed, you sell the stock. You sell them all. Get them all off the place before you lose any ground cover. You want that same, in my opinion, you want 1,000 kilograms of dry matter. You still want that cover there with a bit of leaf area on it, so that you protect your soil and your microbes and drying out of your soil. You'll get a lot better regrowth when the rain does come. But yeah, it's best to cut your losses then. What you don't want to do, particularly if you're lifestyle farming, I don't care whether you're lifestyle farming or commercially farming, you sell the lot. Just you buy them in while you've got the feed. If it's looking like you're not going to have the feed, you sell them out. Cut your losses, because for you to feed them you'll end up more than it's worth. Sorry about that. So it's very important facet. And it's simple if you're doing that. As you can see by the calendar, there's a lot less involvement as regards particularly the stock. Now that, hay. Did you have a question about that?
Yeah. Is there a reason you showed that you buy hay, I guess, in the beginning of November? Is there a reason why you're buying it instead of maybe growing it?
Okay. A lot of people like the idea of growing it because in spring you usually get an excess of feed. And that's when, once again, that's when if you've got trading, you've got that excess feed in spring, and that's what you utilise. And then when you run out of feed, you sell the stock. So this one here is set up for buying the animals when you've got the feed and selling them when feed's likely to be running out. Okay, so that's now as regards hay, the only time in a trading enterprise you want hay is when you induct them. And I suggest hay is better than silage for induction and for selling. And provided it's good quality hay, it's got to be good quality hay because you're wanting the animals to look their best when you're selling them. So, but that's marketing. We can deal with marketing another time, possibly. But yeah, so the only time you really want hay in training, but you will want it for breeding, for when you wean the stock, and before you sell the stock, any stock off the place, you want good quality hay. Now, I suggest if you're a small time farmer, a small volume farmer, I suggest you buy in hay because 9 times out of 10 you'll buy a lot better than you can make. You'll have trouble getting contractors, particularly for a small area. It's also costly. It's not good for your pastures to cut hay. Silage isn't so bad because silage is like another grazing. Provided if you don't cut it too short, it's like another grazing, and you've still got moisture. It's that time of the season whereby you can do it, and it's a higher cost to do silage, but it's also a higher value feed. And so I don't mind silage, but buying hay for small timers, I wouldn't recommend it at all for those various reasons. So buy it in, but buy tested hay. And if you can get together with neighbours so that you get a whole truck load, you can get cheaper. And November's the time whereby people will sell you straight out of the paddock rather than having to store it for you. Okay, so make sure it's tested and so forth beforehand, because you don't want to bring on weeds. That's a very important thing about buying in hay. But I've seen so much hay done by paddocks that all you're doing is spreading the weeds throughout your place as well. Okay. In other words, I better keep going, Lisa. Okay, now we're getting on to sheep and goat management. Now I lump these two together because pretty much the same. Gestation length. There's only 5 days difference on the average between sheep and goats. Goats have a bit longer gestation, but basically sheep and goats have a 5 months gestation and approximately 3 months lactation. That can be earlier or longer, depending on what the circumstances are. Now, this is a very important point whereby sheep and goats suit our dry climate so much better, because once they've weaned their progeny, they are dry, what I call dry, or the non-lactating animals. That means you can put them onto maintenance rations. Okay, now much easier to feed cattle, sheep and or goats on maintenance rations, much cheaper than it is if it's lactating. So, so you can have your goats and your sheep lambing and kidding at the beginning of spring, so that you're weaning them when usually in droughts you usually get spring, not always at Buchan, but usually get some sort of spring feed anyway. So that helps. So it lessens the feed bill. So that's a very important facet as regards having sheep and goats as opposed to cattle. Okay, Now, other advantages, of course, is that they are small, particularly for lifestyle farmers. You can actually catch a sheep and goats. That's where the horns are handy with goats to catch them, but they're not very, particularly when they're kids, they're sharp horns, and can be quite dangerous when you actually, if you're doing anything with them, those very sharp horns. And it goes for the sheep as well that have got horns. Most have it nowadays. Wiltshire horns have, of course. Yeah, so that is being able to do that. And of course, your yards are much less strong and high, so a lot less cost involved with sheep and goat yards. And you can manhandle them in the yards, turn them over, check their teeth or whatever it may be you need to do with them. So that's a really good advantage over cattle. Here, and there are goats that are hair goats and sheep. They're both, so you don't have the wool challenge, but sometimes, depending on the generations of shedding, they may have wool that you can easily get. I used to have I've got a electric clippers, which are very handy for a few of the shedding sheep that may retain their wool, tidy them up, and even fly strike it from time to time. Okay. Sheep and goats, stockyards, we've done that. Now, the bucks and rams are easier and safer to handle, but be aware, my daughter was put off sheep because ram ran over her, butted her, and yep, so that was put off her. Yep, I mentioned that last time, I think. Okay, now some of the challenges. You've got to have better fencing for sheep and goat, particularly goats. They'll get through anything and they'll climb over anything. So you just got to be very particular on those. But if you've got good goat-proof fences with a hot wire on them, it'll certainly help. And that's where predators as well. Foxes are notorious for taking lambs. We had a lot of wild dog problems down on the Snowy River up in the hills. Wild dogs, they killed a lot of our goats. But we also had neighbours' dogs come in and kill some of our sheep as well. But I got a couple of those dogs. So dogs are a major problem, and particularly for peri-urban areas. It can be, dogs aren't a problem if they're by themselves usually. It's when they get together, they become different animals, and the old pack mentality comes in and they egg each other on. And so your fence, make sure your dogs are contained at night. Very important, and also be aware that neighbours' dogs can come in. Okay, so that's a big one. Weather, notorious goats and lambs, kids and lambs don't like cold, wet weather. So make sure you pick well-sheltered paddocks for that, and make sure they're in good condition. The sheep and the goats are in good condition as well. And also, preferably, if you can put them in one of those paddocks, as I said, for dry, they can lamb in that. You can't see it, but if you've got some tussocks and stuff like that in your paddocks, it's really good shelter for the young ones. Wool management, shearing, of course, if you've got wool sheep, crutching is always a thing. I used to always do shearing before lambing, because particularly if you've got meat type sheep, they can get cast on their backs. And if you're not on it, they can die from that, suffocate effectively. So we used to shear them beforehand. They're far less likely to get stuck on their backs, cast. So it's a good time to do the shearing. Crutching, of course, always good to do before joining. And also to help prevent fly strike. So there are backliners for fly strike, but if you've got small numbers and stuff like that, I wouldn't worry about that. But you want to be proactive about fly strike by crutching and making sure your animals aren't scouring from worms or wherever it may be, parasites. Okay, and the shedding sheep now, as regards that, shedding sheep, they get rid of their wool and they love ring lock or fences to be able to rub on. And I hate the sight of that. So that's another reason for having a hot wire on each side of your fence at about 50 to 60 centimetres high enough for them to get to eat underneath, but not high enough for them to rub against the fences. Okay, and the feet challenges, of course, you can have foot rot and scald much more than you won't get that much in your cattle. And that's what.
Malcolm, I've just got to give you an update on time. We've got 4 minutes left.
Oh, crikey. Yeah, okay, we better
So
get going.
people might have to log off at about 7:30. So if we could do the management stuff and then we can focus on any questions or bits that you want to focus
Okay,
on.
just go through the slides quickly then. Let's see. Next one. Okay, that's all mapped out there for you for your reference. Okay, go on. Next one. Okay, don't forget the bulls. They need different treatment, not special, but they need different treatment to your males need different treatment to your females. From that point of view, and just be very wary of particularly bulls, but the males, there's testosterone involved, and that can create problems with neighbours' bulls, all sorts of things. The rams and bucks are not so bad, but bulls are big and they can hurt. I can tell you, I've been thrown right up in the air with them. So that bull was stressed out from running around blackberries. Okay. Okay, that's the same principles as cattle. So according to feed, time and skill levels, trading is much simpler, easier, and can be just as rewarding. Okay, next one. Okay, it's been, yeah, we've had 4 so far on the journey. And I'd really like to thank, you for joining us on this journey. And I hope you've really got something from it. Principles. Next slide, thanks. Okay, and if you haven't got anything else but you make your decisions keeping these principles in mind, and you do your actions according to the circle of actions. If you take away nothing else from these webinars, you're going to be right in front and increase your chances of making a most enjoyable farming lifestyle. Yeah, and remember to keep those smiles on there. It won't be always on there, but yeah, it will be when you think about it and when you see your kids enjoying it and getting a lot from it as well as yourselves. And I learnt, an old timer told me once, looking back, I wish to hell over his career as a farmer, wish to hell I'd used my head more than my hands, looking back. And I learnt the same thing, but it took me 25 years before I learnt that. Okay.
So thank you, Malcolm. I guess I have a question, before I talk about webinar 5. Someone in the survey asked about abattoirs, where maybe small abattoirs that are catered for hobby farmers or niche industries might be available. I guess if you're trying to do that marketing for your specific animals that you put money into, where they might be available.
Yeah, particularly I know of a few paddock to plate operations. In fact, I was involved in Gippsland Natural or Enviromeat in South Gippsland there, and in West Central Gippsland. And yeah, the abattoirs were lucky. We had Bradfords there, and they are very good meat processors that went along with it. And the paddock to plate, it's a real challenge for people to get their animals processed. And it's a case. The short answer is it's a supply and demand and economics. They won't come there unless there's a certain amount of supply and or demand for their services. If there was a big demand for their services, they would stay in business. If they've only got a small demand, they'll go out of business. It is a bloody hard industry to be in. As you know, I know that from my personally. I worked in boning rooms when I was young, and it is a very hard industry. Now, the big picture, the big long-term answer to it, it depends on how long society is prepared to put up with monopolies and big business, and that's what's controlling it. Huge monopolies in the meat industry, the food industry as a whole, generally speaking. They do bring some efficiencies and everything else like that, but they certainly don't help the aim is to get rid of all small
few
abattoirs.
that you've mentioned, those few smaller niche abattoirs. If you could, I think I know one. I think it's Castle House, or I know that they do some small processing, but I guess if there's a few that we know of, we'll I guess send that out as an answer to that person's question.
Yeah, I don't know what ones are around there. I know the general areas, but yeah, and some of the the intermediate ones, King Island, for example, over there judging their carcass, their steer competitions and so forth, and yeah, they had a really good brand and everything else, and bloody JBS went and bought them out, and now they just closed down on King Island. And now they send them all to Tasmania. So yeah, it's not a good thing. It's not good.
So I guess a hard question to answer in that respect.
Well, and if you get cooperatives happening, cooperatives are famous for going out of business pretty quickly because they concentrate. They don't run a business likewise properly.
So I'll just go through, I guess, what's going to be webinar 5. So I guess we touched a little bit on when you're talking about quarantining and drenching and what that looks like. So for webinar 5, we've got Dr. Chelsea Hare. She's from Herd Solutions down in Southeast Gippsland. She's a livestock veterinarian. So she's just going to be talking about what looking after your animal health, nutrition and welfare looks like from the beginning, that preventative care, what it looks like for the life of the animal, and what happens when, I guess, your animal does get sick, recognizing those health issues and when to actually call a vet, and some options that are available to you, like phone a vet. So that's what Chelsea's going to be talking about next week. That's just a little bit of an overview. Now, Malcolm, we're going to say goodbye to you. You've been amazing for the past 4 webinars, but there will be follow-up events. So Malcolm's going to be doing 2 events, sort of centering around the stuff that we've discussed during these previous 4 webinars. One is a Zoom Q&A discussion forum. So that's going to be on Wednesday the 10th. And that's actually running a little bit later, just in case you weren't able to make it to some of our webinars and weren't able to answer some questions or ask questions live. We're going to be running it from 7:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. And it's a really great opportunity to discuss questions from the webinar or share your insights and experience, and sometimes stuff that you didn't get to hear during the webinar and things that you want to hear about next time, or some gaps, or have a discussion about stuff that you felt like wasn't answered. So that we're going to be running that on April 10th.
Can I interrupt you there?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, really looking forward to that, so we can have interaction.
Yep.
Not just the one way. We can have good interaction, and there's a couple of other questions that haven't been answered.
Yep.
And it'll be good to follow those through. So that'll be really great.
So StockSense and Malcolm will also be at the Seymour Alternative Farming Expo. So we'll be there on Friday the 12th. So we'll have 2 sessions, one running in the morning and one running in the evening. So that first one is going to be talking about setting up your farm. So focusing on the beginning of your journey, getting yourself ready, and then really focusing on how to set it up for that production, productivity, welfare, and health of your animals, as well as for the lecture 2 at 2:30 p.m. That's going to be for buying your animals. So talking about the process, like what James and you were talking about before.
Yeah. Once again, it won't be a lecture.
That's what they called it when the advertising. So it's not really a lecture. It's sort of going to be back and forth in those questions.
It's going to be interactive, which
Yep.
I will enjoy a lot more than webinars.
Yeah.
Lectures. Yep.
Beautiful. So this is just, so the next few slides, these are just information and resources that we've all referenced throughout the webinar series. This is all going to be made available. All of these links are hyperlinks, so you can click on them and go to them. And also there will be a lot of resources that will attach. So some of them, so for example, the fencing fact sheet will be sent out post this webinar. So you should get that on Friday afternoon or evening or Saturday morning, depending on how things are. And there's also some stocking information and feed budgeting going to be sent up at the end. If you're not getting our emails and you'll post follow-up emails, if you could just let us know, send us an email. Maybe the email isn't working or registration link hasn't worked, then we can send you all of this information for you to refer to. So yeah, thank you so much, Malcolm, for hosting and being such a knowledgeable and amazing presenter for the past 4 webinars, and we're looking forward to having you for the follow-up discussion and having a bit more of that engagement and interactions, and people can ask the questions that they want.
And thank you, Lisa, and your team, Tegan and StockSense. It's really great. It's been a great opportunity. Thank you very much for that, and we wish you all the best for the next 2 webinars. And yeah, it'd be
beautiful. And thank you everyone for joining us. Have a lovely night.